I agree. There's this very fundamental connection between freedom and responsibility. Another definition or an angle on responsibility I was given recently that I thought is interesting is it's in the word, actually, the ability to respond, right? So if you look at the caveman again, right? Again, he's got all this freedom, what have you. But if he gets an infection, if he gets a cut and he gets an infection, well, he doesn't have the option or the ability to respond to that infection with antibiotics. So there's we can not only, as you're saying, responsibility go up from the perspective of an individual taking more responsibility in their life, but by taking on more responsibility in the traditional sense, we increase our ability to respond to problems, right? That's what accumulating more capital is. It's more solutions to problems, right? We've got stockpiles of food and houses and all these things that satisfy our wants. So it's an interesting connection. And then you could also say that you're free to do whatever you want. You're free to go and ignore gravity, for instance, as we've said, but you're not free to evade the consequences of falling to your death, right? If you just ignore that, then you're going to die. So it's a very interesting connection between freedom and responsibility. And you brought up Frankel as well. Maybe he's got the connection. There's a quote by him that I'll just roughly paraphrase, but he says something to the effect of, between our circumstances and our response to the circumstances, there's a space that we all have. And in that space, no matter what, we get to choose how to respond. All right. Something happens to us, we choose how to respond to it. And he called that the final human freedom. That's the one form of freedom.
Mature people can choose how to respond.
Well,
so this is right.
I think everyone ultimately chooses, but I think you could not work on yourself and respond unthinkingly, right? But ultimately,
I just think about kids, right? So like I have a daughter who's just graduated high school, and there's still a lot of ways that she's really immature with her own. Hopefully she's not going to listen to this, so not to throw her under the bus, but where I'm like, you're not mature in this way. You have to be able to. Alex is laughing. She's not going to listen to this, but you have to be able to. Part of becoming an adult, part of maturing is learning how to control these emotions, learning how to control your response. And so this goes back to a lot of what we keep hitting on in this thread of Marxism and appealing to these people who have never just really matured. They haven't learned to think past, that first order, et cetera. And so that ability to respond or controlling your response to those situations, I think is part of that.
That's a great point. We're talking about adults who have fully developed reason and autonomy. Definitely can't put this responsibility on kids, I suppose.
But today we have adults, right? But we have adults today who have just never evolved or matured to that point. I think it's a big problem.
Yeah, it's a great point. There's one other, I think this is a Peterson quote, and he says, "Opportunity lurks where responsibility has been abdicated." And it's, as you're saying earlier, the guy that put all his money in Terra or Bieber getting the jab, like, you're abdicating your responsibility, right? You had the ability to choose how to preserve your capital or protect your health, and you basically passed that option to someone else, or you deferred the choice to someone else. Again, knowingly or unknowingly, it doesn't really matter. It just is what it is. So it seems like if Peterson's quote is right, and we could reduce the degree to which people are abdicating responsibility, there's a big opportunity there just to create a world that works, where people are responsible at the individual level. What a crazy notion that is. Anything else on that? I wanted to jump back to forcing function, because I think that's a great definition. I know you guys use that a lot throughout the book.
Yeah, let's go back there. Yeah.
So forcing function, you guys defined as, it's a behavior shaping constraint or any task, activity, or event that forces one to take action and produce a result. In any system, the forcing function is an aspect of the design that prevents a user from taking an action without consciously considering information relevant to that action. In other words, it forces conscious attention upon something and thus makes deliberate or guides the performance of a task. So I noticed throughout, actually in some of these definitions and later on in the book, you guys are actually describing a certain notion or idea, and then you'll describe what its forcing function is. And I thought that was just really cool way to connect the definitions, I suppose. And I've also just found that on a personal level, forcing functions are really important. Like if you want to get something done, fucking give yourself a deadline, right? Commit to something, some forcing function in terms of time or space or whatever it is. Otherwise, you don't have much of an incentive to move. And I think people would do well to incorporate more forcing functions into their lives.
Yes, I took a blend of like Darwinist and engineering philosophy around trying to define this one. So I studied engineering when I was younger, and part of good design, part of good engineering is, creating like forcing functions. And Steve Jobs was a master at this, for example, when he built the Apple headquarters. He put toilets and common areas in strategic places so that he would maximize the amount of interactions that people from different divisions of the company would have. And he did that particularly well at the Pixar HQ, and then later at the OG Apple HQ that he did. And he was huge on that stuff. So forcing function, as you said, is like there's an element of that which is design oriented, like setting deadlines and, having your shit packed for the gym the day before, creating commitments. But there's another piece to forcing function, which is just the natural way of things that don't involve coercion. We kind of talked about Bitcoin before as a forcing function to better behavior or morality, right? Or gravity as a forcing function to not jump off the cliff, right? So you have this kind of natural, what would you call it? Like this signal telling you not to do something. So it's kind of like a reverse forcing function. But I mean, since all forcing functions, whether they're reverse or positive, like they are what they are, these things exist, and they create a response, tying back to responsibility or the ability to respond by the user or the actor to orient their behavior around a particular forcing function. So that, incentives and all sorts of stuff come into this. But this is where Bitcoin is like a beautifully designed forcing function for better, more moral, lower time preference behavior, because Bitcoin doesn't need to force you to save it. By the fact that it exists, you kind of have this internal desire to save because you want to orient yourself around this immovable object known as Bitcoin. So yeah, thanks for bringing that one up. I think that one's a really interesting piece.
Yeah, I think along with that, you mentioned is the incentive. So the forcing function has that Darwinian approach, but really it incentivizes you to do things. So to the point of packing your stuff before you go. Well, now I could quit, but my stuff's already sitting right there by the door. It incentivizes me to go. Or Bitcoin, to your point, incentivizes savings, incentivizes people to play the game. So in a fiat money system where the government could just steal your wealth through inflation or tax a progressive tax structure, it could incentivize a government to provide value to you in exchange for some wealth as opposed to just stealing it. And so Bitcoin could force that function through that incentive structure.